Well, we are so glad that you have come this morning, and we hope that this is one of many that we're able to do in the future. And I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. But without hesitating, we want to go ahead and give Mike Quayle some time this morning. And Mike has recently, probably in the last year, 6 months to a year, maybe a year now at least, has been attending Westmore and with his beautiful wife, Melissa, better known as Missy among the family. And because they haven't been married that long, we let her come this morning. Missy, would you stand? Let's let Missy know we're glad she's here. Yes. And Mike is definitely married up, and he knows that. And we're proud of Missy. And many of you may not know this. Missy is Barry Ray's sister. And of all things, Mike is sharing for the first time with the Westmore family, and Barry's out on a baseball trip with his son. Now, he did promise me he's going to be back tonight for tomorrow morning's services, so we'll see if he makes it. But anyway, we appreciate their family. Mike Quayle, born in Phoenix, grew up in Huntington, Indiana, attended Culver Military Academy and Hillsdale College. That's in Michigan, by the way, great place to be from. He was a firefighter, a paramedic, and before settling down as a journalist and newspaper publisher, proud father of 3. And I've heard about his kids, and I can tell you he's a proud father. Has a tremendous, famous brother, and I'll let he'll tell you about that. Married to Melissa, we've shared that, and he's now retired. And at least he says he is. He still gets around, and we appreciate Mike so much, and we're proud to have you as a brother in the Lord. And upon hearing Mike's story, it's probably been 6 months ago, 4 to 6 months ago, I heard it more in an entire manner. And wow, God has done a work for Mike. You let him know you're glad he's here today and part of the Westmore family.
Well, thank you very much. It certainly is an honor to be here. And for just a minute, I'd just like to say, Dear Father, let the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my strength and my loving Redeemer. Amen. Amen. Well, I can't tell you how honored I am to be kicking off this morning in these rounds of men's breakfasts. As Pastor said, I really haven't been a member of the church for very long, and I only moved to Cleveland just within the last year, and I'm just delighted to be here. I do want to acknowledge my little cheering section back there, my wife Melissa and her daughter Tiffany, and my soon-to-be son-in-law Nate Byron. So thanks for coming this morning. It's interesting, a couple of months ago, my brother-in-law Barry came to me and said, the pastor wants to do these men's breakfasts, and I've heard your story and your testimony. Would you like to kick it off? I said, I really don't know. I'm not used to doing that much public speaking anymore. And he said, oh, come on. He says, it's a great story. We'd love to have you. Barry's not here today. He thought it'd be more fun rather than to see his brother-in-law talking at men's breakfast. He's out watching his son play baseball. So anyway, do me a favor tomorrow morning when you see him at church, ask him for $7. Maybe an extra $7 to be put into the collection. Well, as Pastor mentioned, I was born in Phoenix, Arizona, and I want to give you the story of my life. It has been an interesting journey for me, both personally, professionally, and spiritually. It's been a journey that many people have a hard time understanding, and I don't know if I do all the time. But I was born in Phoenix and grew up in the 1950s, 60s nuclear family. 2 parents, father worked, mother was a homemaker. 4 siblings. I have a twin sister, and I've got an older brother who's a little bit more famous than I am, who's 10 years older than I am, and then I've got another brother who's 8 years older than I am. So it was your typical family. But it was a little bit different right from the start. My twin sister and I were adopted as infants, and I don't know if there are any people here who were adopted or adopted children, but adopted children, right from the very start, have a tendency to want to be people pleasers. As I grew up and found out that I was adopted, of course I was very grateful to the mother and father and the family who had adopted me. But then the older brothers took over, and even my dad from time to time in the joking, and said, well, Mom and Dad adopted Martha. They didn't want you. You were the bonus that came along with this. Well, it was a big joke in the family, and I kind of, even as a little boy, I kind of laughed about it. And my mother, I could always notice the pain on her face when this was being said. And I can remember arguments in the family. Don't say that to Mike. That's not very nice. Anyway, as I grew up, I developed into the classic nerd. Here I am living in Huntington, Indiana, which is a small farming community in northern Indiana. And I was very small, was not coordinated, not very popular with any of the groups in school. My sister was. My sister was a very popular young girl. So as I grew up, I was just slowly being kind of pushed aside, which was having terrible, terrible impacts on me. As I was growing up in Huntington, Indiana, most everybody in town was a Catholic, a Roman Catholic. And I had been baptized as a child as a Presbyterian, but I lived amongst all these Catholics, all my friends, and I was at that time then an Episcopal churchgoer with my parents, not really understanding much about the Episcopal Church, but that's the church I was in. But I started feeling really jealous of all these Catholic kids because they got to go to these great fish fries on Friday nights. You've all seen them. And my friends, they got to go to confession every Saturday morning and confess their sins in a little room in a box with a priest there. And so I wanted to be like them, so I went to do a confession, and the priest said, well, you're not a Catholic, you can't be here. And asked me to leave. And I had to leave the church. And I can remember this, I was 9 or 10 years old, and I was devastated. I thought, God doesn't want me. I'm not supposed to be here. But I kept on trying to belong to God somewhere because my parents always prayed at the dinner table, and we would go to church on Sunday mornings. So then the Episcopal priest asked me when I was 11 years old if I wanted to be an altar boy or an acolyte, which is the term for it. And all of a sudden I was in robes and participating in all these rituals, and I thought, boy, God really likes me now. I mean, I'm part of the game plan. I'm part of the team. So I finally felt like I belonged to something, even as a 10 or 11-year-old child. And going through all that, I would drag my parents literally to church every Sunday mornings because I had to work. And, in the summertime, Dad wanted to do other things. And we weren't the, quote, Christian family that what I am now. But so I had to drag my parents to church. And I always felt that was kind of odd. Why do you have to, drag somebody to church? Well, it does happen, folks. As I continued to grow up, I continued not to really to fit in. And I would ask Father Schlotterbeck, which was his name. He was a Canadian Episcopal priest, and I would ask him questions. I was quite interested in the Lord and quite interested in why we did things the way we did in church. And if you aren't knowledgeable of the Episcopal or the Roman Catholic service, it's all centered around the Eucharist or the communion. And you admit your sins every Sunday, you're forgiven, and you don't go to church for another week. And that's all. There's very little Bible study, there's very little understanding of Scripture, and the priest's attempt to educate is through the gospel each Sunday morning before communion and his interpretation of it. And it's 15 minutes, so keep track. And so anyway, as I grew up in the Episcopal Church and grew up just socially, I was being farther and farther ostracized as a child. My sister was quite popular. I was making poor grades in junior high school, and I was trying to connect with popular kids. And I connected with a kid when I was 12, and I thought, wow, this kid's great. And as 12-year-olds, his parents were gone one day, we got into his father's liquor cabinet. And that was my first taste of alcohol when I was about 12. And we giggled and we had fun and pretended we were really drunk. I threw up. And it was one of these things that, I really started feeling like I was part of a little something here. That was in the summer. I went back to school that fall and was further ostracized by other kids because I just wasn't cool. I was the little nerd in class, and I was being made fun of frequently. And then I would long to be part of something. And then I had the opportunity to go to a private school, a military school in northern Indiana. And I took that opportunity because I could start my life over again. It was a new beginning. And I got there and it was even worse for me. In private schools there are rich children and there are athletic children. There are lots of talent academically and non-academically. I didn't fit into any of those molds. And so I struggled, but I did connect with a group of guys who like to press the rules a little bit, and they smoked marijuana and did some other drugs, and this was the group that attracted me because I was part of that group. And I'm here to tell you my story today because I became a full-fledged alcoholic when I was 17 years old. And that's just not drinking a couple of beers a week. That was drinking a lot. And I know everybody in this room has either somebody in their family, a friend's family, a distant relative, somebody that's probably struggled with drugs and alcohol. There may be gentlemen here today who struggle with drugs and alcohol. But I am sitting here in front of you today as a recovering drug addict and alcoholic from one of the nicest homegrown families that northern Indiana ever produced. And that was my claim to fame when I was 17 years old. And I went off to college to Michigan for one reason. They had an 18-year-old drinking age in 1974. And I knew I could go up there legally, and I had a few months until I turned 18 and drink. Now, all through this, when I had gone to military school, I had gotten away from church. There was no Episcopal church on the campus at Culver. There was just a Protestant service. And the church, the Lord, all that seemed to kind of disappear from my life. And it just wasn't present. And when I went away to college, it got even worse. And the decadence and the immorality of a college campus in the mid-1970s was very, very evident. And the first night I got to college, I was a star. For the first time in my life, I was a star. I went to a fraternity party who had a beer keg out in the backyard, and I could chug a pitcher of beer faster than anybody else at that party, and there was a couple of hundred people there. And I was being cheered, I was being placed on people's shoulders, I was the champ. They wanted me to join their fraternity because during Greek week I was going to be able to beat everybody. I ended up passed out in an alley that night, almost getting run over, but I was a star. And through that, this fraternity, did anybody ever see Animal House, the Animal House? That was my fraternity, by the way. And I was the nerd president of that fraternity, but I could drink a beer. Anyway, throughout this, the guilt in my life, the guilt, I was not completing things. I was up all night partying. I was, trying new drugs. I was doing everything I could, and still a star of this little group of gentlemen on this campus. I got almost completed with my college education with not a very good GPA. By the Christmas before I was to graduate, I knew I wasn't going to have the grades or the credits to be able to graduate, so I quit one semester early, or a semester and a half early. So one more thing in my life that I had quit. And the guilt from that, I lied to my father about why I wanted to quit. He allowed me to quit. I said, Dad, I want to go to work for you at one of your newspapers out west. So I wanted to get away. I wanted to run away and hide, because once again I had failed as a student. At that time I felt like I had failed as a son. So I drove a car across the country and went to work for my father and his newspaper, and I wasn't ready to settle down with that, and I had lots of other aspirations. So I became an EMT, and that was something that had always kind of interested me. But once again, this was a new start. It was a chance for me to impress somebody. So my drinking subsided a little bit, my drug use subsided. I'm going to be a professional firefighter and paramedic, and I did that. And I met my first wife, whose brother-in-law was a captain on the fire department that I eventually went to work for. And Cindy was an East Tennessee girl. She was from Jonesboro, near the Tri-Cities, and she brought to our marriage, she brought 2 young children. They had been abandoned by her husband and their father. And so I went from confirmed bachelor and partier to a husband and a father. I didn't realize how hard that was and how expensive that was and how draining that was. And I was working 24-hour shifts, and the time that I was able to spend with my friends had gone away. And where's my party time? Why can't I do this anymore? So the guilt and the workload kept working on me, and during that time of my life, the drinking started picking up. The guilt started coming back on me. I was back drinking just lots and lots of liquor. And I decided one more time I had come across a couple instances as a fireman, both in EMS as well as fighting fires, that I did not want to abandon these children because of getting hurt or killed in a fire, so I quit. One more time, here's another failure. I quit as a fireman. I went to work as a journalist and bought a little newspaper and moved to a little town, brand new start. And within the first few months there, I met the owner of one of the big local bars. And there it was again. So I was working till all hours of the night on a little newspaper, and getting it really worse and worse and worse in my life. And during this time, there was no spirituality in my life. I had pretty much abandoned God. I didn't have any use for that. I didn't understand it to begin with, and but I had my children baptized in the Episcopal Church, and I thought I was doing everything that a father was supposed to do. And one night I was driving home and blacked out at the wheel, ran over a street sign and put a big dent in the front of the car, and my wife woke up the next morning, saw the front end of the car, and said, "What happened?" I had absolutely no idea. So she had had enough of my drinking, and she explained that to me by saying, "I'm taking the children and leaving you unless you decide to get help." And so in 1986, my wife made me go to St. Luke's Hospital in Phoenix to get sober. And I thought, I'll do anything to keep my wife and keep my children. And I was embarrassed, as all alcoholics are embarrassed to be caught and to have my family told that I was this alcoholic. And I knew I had a drinking problem, but I was not ready to be called an alcoholic. And so I went to this 30-day program, stopped drinking. I was on top of the world at the end of 30 days, had to come home and explain to my children where I had been. They were still pretty young at that point, didn't understand. They knew that Dad wasn't going to walk funny anymore. which is all my little girl Jamie understood at that point. So 10 years elapsed after that, and I was not sober, but I was not drinking. I was a dry drunk. I was still doing the same things in my mind as I always had done. But during this time, I bought a newspaper in Indiana and went to work for a daily newspaper, moved my family across the country, started up in this beautiful little city in southern Indiana, and for the first time in my life, I was a publisher of the daily newspaper. My brother was a senator in Indiana, and everybody in my family was proud of me. And so as time went on, the job got harder and harder and harder. And then the worst thing in my life that could have ever happened to me, my wife was diagnosed with cancer in 1994. My children were fairly young in junior high school. My daughter was in 6th grade. And being a paramedic, being around the medical community, I knew what this type of leukemia was going to do. It was going to kill my wife. But I was ready to do everything I could financially and whatever I could to save her life. And we traveled around the country looking for experimental programs, looking for something to save her life. I was a warden in the Episcopal Church, which meant I was one of the church leaders, but I never once really turned to God. I never asked God for really any kind of serious help. And I felt myself weakening. I had not been going to AA over the past couple years. I was trying to do it all by myself, and I was up late at night doing the cooking and cleaning and trying to have a household that was as normal as could possibly be. As her disease progressed, my strength failed, and a couple of months before she eventually died, I started drinking again, which was the worst thing I could have possibly done at that time. But I'd always told Cindy I would not keep her in a vegetative state on life support or whatever. The day came when she collapsed with pneumonia in the hospital and was put on a ventilator. And this was after years of extensive chemotherapy and radiation. And it was the first time I actually asked God for help. And I asked God to take my wife. Now, I had faith, but little faith. I didn't understand really at that point what faith was, but I knew that if I asked for it, it could possibly happen. Well, I unplugged the ventilator that was keeping my wife alive. She died in my arms, and then I had to go home or go back to the apartment in Durham, North Carolina, and tell my daughter that her mother was gone. So that night, Jamie went to bed, and I went out and bought, I don't know how many, 6 packs of beer. And I passed out in the room next to my daughter. Now she's now 15 years old. And so my drinking started up again. And it didn't take long. And if any of you know anything about alcoholism or drug addiction, the disease goes merrily along whether you're doing anything or not. So I picked up alcohol at a point that it took me a lot more to get high and to take care of all my grief and my embarrassment, and I was trying to be so strong for everybody else, and I would go to my room every night and cry, and my life had really turned into something that I couldn't manage it. Over the next few months, my drinking increased, and I justified dating another woman. I thought, okay, Cindy and I always agreed that we would, that I would get remarried and whatever. And I was married in about a year and a half in a very toxic relationship. We met when both of us were drinking. We met when everything that happened to us, we did over alcohol. During this time, I had abandoned God. God didn't do what I had asked Him to. I didn't understand where He was. Why wasn't He helping my children? Why wasn't He helping me? I would sit alone in my car at night coming home from the bar out in the driveway and drink more and tell God that I was just pretty much kind of done. I mean, where was He? Why wasn't He helping me? And so this went on. I got married, and it was just a couple years after I got remarried. My life was a series of grandiosity. I was making lots of money. I was out at restaurants every night with my wife, buying everybody in the restaurant dinner and bar bills, and spending thousands of dollars literally every night because I wanted people to like me. God had abandoned me. Somebody had to like me. I wasn't sure if my wife at that point really liked me. She liked the money and the parties, but I wasn't really sure really where I was going. My newspaper had been sold, and I was playing golf every day, 36 hole. I was a legend in my own mind. Did you know I was going to whip Tiger Woods in the Open? And I was 50 years old, so I was going to take care of that. And I was becoming a person that I had no idea who I was. And there was a period, though, my famous big brother was elected to be vice president, and that was the period that I wasn't drinking. So it was very fortunate that I was not, because I probably would have embarrassed him worse than President Carter's brother Billy embarrassed him. But skip forward to 2004. My health was terrible. I was 270, 280 pounds of bad health. My liver was as hard as a rock. I was just doing stupid things. I was embarrassing myself in front of my children, and in front of my family was aware now that I was drinking again. And nobody was willing to mention it to me other than my wife. And she finally started calling my family. And I went into a tirade over this. You had no right to call my family. And my family convened a meeting for us all in Santa Barbara, California, and had an intervention. And an intervention is something very ugly if you're not ready for it. I stated to my family, I'm going to go back to my room and watch the golf tournament on TV and have a little rest. Little did anybody know that I had smuggled in 4 bottles of wine that I was going to enjoy that afternoon. And my mom called my room and said, I want to talk to you, come down to my room. And I went down to a room, there was my family, and pretty much put me in the corner. My brother Chris blocked the door, and my family just basically said, we know that you're drinking, we know that you're in ill health. Your daughter and your wife want you to go get some help. And I was angry, very angry. And who did I blame first? Any guesses? God. I blamed God for this. So my brother said, we've got a room for you at Betty Ford down in Palm Springs if you'll go. And I said, well, I don't want to be here. So we chartered a plane, went down there, and it was August 15th of 2004, and I walked in and said, hi, my name's Mike Quayle, and I'm an alcoholic and a drug addict, and I need help. And so they admitted me, and between the admitting and going to the room, I smoked about almost 3 packs of cigarettes in 2 hours. That's how out of control my life was. And the next morning I woke up in detox, and I hadn't been, about the previous week, I hadn't been drinking a whole lot, so I wasn't shaking, and I really didn't need a whole lot of medical intervention. But I was willing to be there. I was embarrassed. I was very angry at God. I was angry at my wife at that time. I was angry at my daughter. I was really mad at my doctor who had told my wife that he had diagnosed me with acute alcohol abuse, and I called him a quack, and so almost severed that relationship. So my life had really, I don't know if I could have gotten any lower other than death. And at that point, death may have been the better thing for me. But within a couple of days, the clarity starts to come on, and I start going to counseling with my small group. And I met one of the spiritual counselors there was a Brother Patrick, who was a Benedictine monk in his former life, who was a raging alcoholic who had been clean and sober, and was part of the spiritual staff there. And he came to me and he said, is there anything I can do for you spiritually? And I said, well, first of all, you can keep God away from me because he doesn't work, and I'll just do this AA thing, and I'll be out of here in a month. And I was partly accepting, but once again I was justifying some of my behavior. I survived the first month there, and things were changing in my mind. And I had a couple of visits from my brother Dan, and who brought messages from my daughter and from the rest of the family, and how proud they were of me. And I went, wow, my family's proud of me for this, and I'm in a hospital. What are they proud of? But I started feeling differently, and I went to Brother Patrick and I said, where's God? Why hasn't he been part of my life? And he says, he's been right there. And he says, you need to open your eyes and your heart. And he said, Mike, before we're going to let you out of here, you have to accept the third principle and the third step in the 12 steps of AA, and that is to let God have your will and you, so he can work in you and help you with this disease. And I said, God's the problem. That's why I'm here. And he says, no, Mike, you're the problem. You kept God away from you. So I became a little bit more accepting of this as the next week went by, and I would go to bed at night and cry, and why can't I get this, and I want to drink so bad, and I'm tired of this life. I kind of wanted to be dead. My wife was at home, and I knew she was having what I thought was an affair, and it turned out I think she was. But there was a lot of things going on here, and there was a lake right behind my where I stayed at the Betty Ford Center called Hope Lake, and I went out there one morning, and it was very, very still. It was a beautiful desert morning, and I was crying, and I said, why can't I get this, God? Where are you? And at that moment, I'm getting goosebumps. At that moment, a breeze came off of that pond and almost knocked me over. And at that time, the Holy Spirit came to me. And I felt at that moment I could do anything. And I could not get away from this. And the breeze continued, and I kept thinking, everything's going to be okay. God has showed up in my life at this point. And I was there another 3 months, but everything worked out so well in those 3 months. And I did my program, and I was helping others. And every morning I was on my knees thanking God that he was helping me. And the 12 steps made sense, life made sense, love made sense. And I got out of the Betty Ford Center, and unfortunately, there were a lot of tolls in my life. I had to tell all my, quote, friends goodbye because I could not be around them anymore. I ended up in a divorce from my wife, and a couple years after I'd been sober, my daughter, who has been my best friend in my whole life, she says, Daddy, and she had been going to the Baptist church where we live, to their youth group, and that's how she got through her mother's death. She said, "Daddy, I want you to have what I have." And she says, "I want to teach you how to pray." I never knew how to pray. And I was always told you can't pray for yourself, you pray for others. She says, "Daddy, I want to teach you how to pray." And I can remember I broke down, and here's my little girl teaching me, her own father, how to pray and how to love the Lord and how to begin a very important walk with the Lord. So I started my journey with Christ with my daughter hand in hand. And every day just got better, and I got closer, and then she presented me with my first grandchild. And my life kept on getting better, and the thanks that I had in my heart was incredible. And I was still sober. I didn't need anything to help me. And it was getting easier and easier and easier, and I would go to 2 or 3 AA meetings a week, and I would talk to everybody about how God was working in my life. Now, if any of you have ever been associated with AA doesn't prescribe a holy God, a spiritual God. It's a God of your understanding. So if you want your God or a higher power to be a 57 Chevy, well, so be it. But I would say most people outside of California have the same God that I have. The same God that I have. But I started seeing the way God was working in our AA group, and I felt like kind of some sort of a catalyst that I was starting to help other people. And then Jamie presented me with my second granddaughter, and I couldn't ask for anything more. And I had learned how to fly an airplane when I was in high school, and I knew that as long as I was drinking, I could never fly. But I promised myself if I stayed sober long enough, I was going to get my pilot's license back, I was going to buy an airplane, that was going to be my reward to myself. So in 2008, I bought an airplane and put my first granddaughter's date of birth and initials on as the tail number. And life was great for that. And then I decided I wanted to buy another airplane. So I bought a beautiful red and black Waco, which is a biplane from the 1930s. A beautiful, beautiful plane. And that was just a couple years ago. And I had to hire a pilot to teach me how to fly this. It was a tail dragger, it was a different type of an airplane to fly. And I hired a guy in Ohio, and we flew out to Palm Springs to the convention. We flew back. This man was a real Christian. He read scripture every day, and we would get up real early in the morning in the desert, and he would tell me his favorite scriptures. And I said, I want what this guy has. I mean, this guy, and he was an ex-airline pilot, ex-Air Force pilot. And so I went back to Ohio later that December, and I met him. And his daughter says, "You have got to meet somebody. She's like a sister to me, and she loves the Lord." And I said, "I'm not interested. I've been set up enough. I'm really not interested." Well, time went by, so I was sent a picture and some contact information for a beautiful young woman in Cleveland, Tennessee by the name of Melissa Kite, who had suffered a death of her spouse also and was on a journey with the Lord, and thought, okay, I want to meet her. And so a year ago this month, we arranged to meet down here in Cleveland, and we were in love before we even met. Well, a couple weeks after we met, we decided to meet up at Jerry's house, and so I flew the Waco down there and took her for a ride, and there was a plaque, an identification plaque on the inside of the airplane with the numbers on the tail. It was November 835 MK, Mike Quayle. She kept looking at that going, "What is that?" And I said, "That's just the tail numbers of the plane." She says, "That's my birth date and my initials." So God was present. So that airplane has since been sold, and because it's an aerobatic plane, I could probably do some damage to myself in that. So I got rid of the plane. And And we were married last August 31st, and moved down here and joined the Westmore Church of God, and I'm so blessed to be here today. And it has been a very unusual journey of trying to put God into my life. And I came down here and met Barry, met Pastor, met my father-in-law Jimmy Ray, and all of you folks who have been on your journeys a lot longer than I have. I want what you have, and that's why I'm here. And life could not be any better for me, and I'm finally in a club that loves me, and a club that respects me, and a club that wants me, and that's the club of Christ. And so my journey continues, and it keeps getting better. This fall, I will be sober 10 years now. Today is 3,535 days that I've been sober. And I take it a day at a time. And I know that there are many others in the world that are struggling with drugs and alcohol. If you put God in your life, there's so much that can be done with that, and you can get through it. And that's what I tell all of my brothers and sisters in AA is it can happen. But I am just so thrilled to be here today and to be a member of this church, and I appreciate you coming this morning. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Any questions?
Well, thank you all so much for inviting me to be the inaugural speaker at the men's breakfasts, and remember to ask Barry Ray for that $7.